Hi, I'm Chris from Dynojet. In this video, I'm going to show you how to install a Power Commander 5 with its supplied secondary fuel module on this 2014 Honda Valkyrie. To get started, we'll go ahead and pull the seats and both of the side covers. There's two bolts at the rear of the passenger seat. Once those are removed, you can slide it rearward and off. Same thing with the rider seat. There's two bolts right here at the rear. Once removed, the seat can come off. Next, we're going to remove these side panels on both sides, and they just pop right out. Next, we're going to need to remove all the bodywork surrounding both of the radiators on both sides of the bike. We'll need to loosen the intercowl just rear of the front fender. Next, I'm going to pull this rear panel out on both sides. Next, we'll remove these panels on both sides. There are several push pins just on the inside of these panels that need to be removed. Next, we'll need to remove the bezel around the fuel filler. Now we can start to loosen the fuel tank. I got two bolts at the rear on both sides. Once the rear bolts are removed, you can lift the tank enough to access the fuel line, the vent tube, and the electrical connector. There's a electrical connector on the right hand side of the bike. The high pressure fuel line is on the rear side of the tank. And there is a vent line on the right side. There's also a vent line on the left-hand side of the fuel tank. Once those are disconnected, we can lower the tank back down and remove the front bolts. And now we can remove the tank entirely. Now that the tank is off, we'll need to remove the airbox lid. We'll pull this intake air temperature sensor and then remove all the screws around the edge of the airbox lid. After removing the lid and the filter, we'll need to remove the rest of the air box. There's 4 screws on both velocity stacks. When reinstalling these velocity stacks, make sure you have them in the right orientation. There's a left one marked L and the right one is marked R. We'll need to disconnect the 2 crankcase vents here at the rear of the air box. Below the air box, there's a drain tube that needs to come off. There's also a line going to the pair valve at the bottom of the airbox. Now we have the bike disassembled enough to where we can start to install our Power Commander and SFM hardware. We're going to store the 2 modules in this small compartment below the seat. We're going to need to link the 2 modules together using the supplied CAN link cable. Either port on the Power Commander can be linked to either expansion port on the SFM. We also need to make sure that we install our supplied CAN termination plug into one of these modules. It's critical that this be installed. After you've linked the modules together, you can keep them in this compartment here. You can use the supplied Velcro strips to secure the modules. We're going to route the wiring harnesses forward, following just inside the right frame spar. Just in front of the throttle bodies, inside of this rubber boot here, this clear rubber boot, I can find a black connector for my left fuel injector bank and also a black 2-pin connector for the crank position sensor. The Power Commander's wiring harness is going to plug in line with those 2 stock connections. So first I'll unplug the large connector for the left fuel injector bank. I'll plug the Power Commander in line with those 2 connectors. I'll also unplug the black 2-pin connectors for the crank position sensor, and I'll plug the Power Commander in line with those. Here on the right-hand side of the throttle bodies, I can see my throttle position sensor. I'll need to unplug the TPS so I can access the wires to it. I'm going to use my supplied posi tap to attach the single unterminated gray wire on the Power Commander wiring harness to the stock light blue wire, the middle wire on the throttle position sensor. I'm going to take the gray nut of the posi tap and I'm going to push the stock light blue wire into the slot on the gray nut. Then I'll thread the pointed end of the posi tap down onto the gray nut. I'll slide the red nut of the posi tap over the Power Commander's gray wire. Insert the Power Commander's gray wire into the body of the posi tap and thread the red nut down on top of it. After attaching the wire, I can plug the TPS back in. And I'll also want to store these connectors back inside of the rubber boot. There's also a black wire on the Power Commander wiring harness with a small ring lug. That's my ground wire. I'm going to secure that to the common ground on the frame just behind the engine here. And that's all the connections on the Power Commander harness. The SFM harness is going to route along the inside of the frame, and then we're going to come outside of the frame here on the right hand side. The secondary fuel module also has a ground wire, and I'm going to secure that to the common ground right here on the rear of the right cylinder head. I also have a pair of black 4-pin connectors right here inside this clear rubber boot. This is the pair of connectors for the right injector bank. The SFM is going to plug in line there. So I'll disconnect the stock black 4-pin connectors and plug the SFM in line with those. And after making those connections, I can store the connectors back inside the stock rubber boot. And that concludes all of our connections. All we have to do now is reassemble the bike.